All right. Welcome back. Welcome back. We're in the nighttime today. We're in the nighttime. All right. Today, or tonight, I should say, we're talking about the art of dying. The art of dying. All right. So I was watching this podcast, an interview with Thierry Henry. Some of you may know him, some of you may not know him. All right. Really famous French footballer, European football, soccer for you Americans. And he was talking about how at a certain point of his career, it was the end and it was over. And he was no longer a competitor in the arena. He felt like he died. The athlete part of him, the identity of that died. And no one teaches you how to die. And it's an interesting question. It's an interesting concept because people think, oh, die. What do you mean die, die? Like, don't you have to like pass away? But we also have the term ego death. All right. And there's a large reason why against the idea of forcing ego death, of being a proponent of killing your ego. And the reasons are for multiple reasons. But back to this example of Thierry Henry when he said, no one teaches you the art of dying. And I can speak on this because it's happened to me. And people don't understand unless they've been through it. It's a weird concept to grasp. And the thing is that a lot of people will not experience this until much later in their life. The reason being is that ego and identity, who you think you are, who you believe you are, is really an illusion. And when you're born, you're given an ego. You're given an identity, right? Your name, your beliefs, your religions, these things, your purpose, what drives your purpose. And for a long time, people will pursue that. So people will be like, oh, like I need to become a doctor, I need to become this, or I want to get this job, or I want to do this thing, or and that might be their goal for 20 years, right? Like they might have a childhood goal of becoming a dentist and opening their practice. So they go through the schooling system, they do all these things, they do this, and this. 10 years, boom, MD, dental school, medical school, engineer, whatever it is. That's just an example. Point is that the chase within the illusion keeps your identity and your ego solidified. And it's not until that thing ends that it all comes collapsing. – And no one teaches you how to let that go. And I think that there's a big subject to be discussed on the idea of self-grievance. People always tell you, you know, like when if a family member passes away, if your dog passes away, if something tragic happens and you lose something or someone, and people say, oh, you need the time to grieve, you need the time to grieve. If you just gone through like a breakup, you need time to like grieve and everything like that. But it's rare that I see the idea mentioned of self-grievance, grievance of a past or former self that is no longer you. Because multiple selves exist as you go through this life. Your childhood self, your adult self, your young adult self, your mid adult self, your older adult, old self, etc. All these stages, these cycles of death and rebirth that happen indefinitely until the end. And the biggest problem that I see of why people get stuck and why people get stagnant is because they fail to grieve a version of themselves that, for whatever reasons, can no longer exist. Right? Like you see a guy, you might see like an old, washed up high school guy who's always talking about the glory days and everything like that. That guy still has not grieved his past self. So you can't hold on to this and simultaneously move on to this. You gotta let this go in order to move forward into this. And until you let this go, you're never gonna be able to move forward into this thing to where you need to be going, and new adventures and new characters and new plots and storylines and new everything, right? Because you're so nostalgic and so attached to this timeline, to these people, to this character, to who you were in this version of reality that existed before. Now the problem is that for some people, the first time this happens is very chaotic. We can call it a spiritual awakening, we can call it a spiritual rebirth, etc., whatever. The thing is that the first time this happens is when all the neglected things that purpose, that identity that you were in, repressed, right? So you have birth, so you have birth, you have childhood, and in childhood, you're not really programmed into the system of the mainstream. And then around, 5, 6, 7, whatever, different cultures, you start getting your programming into the system, into the mainstream system. And you lose what you were, who you were in this kind of childhood era. Things happen or whatever. And what happens is the mind kind of subdues all that. It kind of pushes all that down, pushes it away into this mainstream version of yourself. So an issue arises when the mainstream self, the program self, dies, has some sort of cataclysmic event where that self has to be discarded because the game has ended or whatever. And what happens is everything that happened over here earlier comes flushing back, rushing back, because all this is just a mask. The program, the first program after childhood is just a mask for what you really are, which is what you were in childhood. So that can be delayed and prolonged almost indefinitely. And some people never want to face what was over here. So what happens is that at the first death, all right, the death of the self, the death of the ego, which is just how we show up perceptively in the world around us, which is an illusion. Everything comes flooding back to you, the core of what you are, the core of those memories, the cores of what formed you. And for a lot of people, that's a very painful experience because they realize it's almost two grievances. Not only are you grieving this version of yourself, which was an illusion, but you also might be grieving a version of yourself that was in a vulnerable position who didn't have the tools and the resources to speak up for yourself in that instance or in that moment. So I think that first death is really a make or break. And no one, I don't really see anyone speaking on this topic. And some people, they stay trapped. They stay completely trapped over here and they can never let this go in order to move forward into new future things. Um, and it's very, very important. It's very, very important to get to understand that that process is natural, to understand that it happens, and to understand that you have to grieve those versions of yourself. Because otherwise it all catches back up to you. You can't escape it. There's no running away, there's no escaping. It catches up to you at some point, whether you want it to or not. Now, on the flip side, the benefits that come with that is a fluidity of the self. And there's a much larger conversation that I may or may not touch on at a future date because I think culturally this is happening in the West, in the US in the West, is a transcendence of the cultural self, the cultural ego that is the West. And so we're seeing this reawakening, this rebirth, these more spiritual matters, and a renaissance of the self taking place because the West is collectively going through this process of grievance and understanding of history and learning and all these things and trying to make sense of that history while also trying to move forward into the future. And so we're in this limbo, ego death, cultural ego death state, which is why you're seeing all these conversations about gender and gender fluidity and all these things, because the death of the self really is is not just a death of your name, it's not just a death of your perspectives or your views or your beliefs. It's almost a death of the body. It's like you know when you get pushed that far back into yourself, it's like I didn't choose any of this. I didn't choose my skin tone. I didn't choose how I look. I didn't choose my family. I didn't choose my upbringing. I didn't choose my name. I didn't choose my sex. I didn't choose my genetic disposition. I didn't choose any of these things. This is what I was born with. And so when you're going through that experience and you're like, well, I didn't choose this. and it's all kind of a joke anyways, it's all a little bit made up, a little bit of illusion, then it's all up for say. Who's to say? Who's to say what I am and what I'm not? You know what I mean? So that's why to some degree I understand that conversation. Now there's an even bigger conversation to be had about accepting what you are, accepting who you are, accepting your genetic dispositions, accepting the circumstances of how you came to be. I think that's a big step, is accepting that responsibility and making the most of what you are and what you have. Um, but back to the benefits, the fluidity. Once you freed yourself from these two grievances, you're free to kind of become whoever you want. You're free to almost become whatever you want because you realize it's just perception. It's just illusion. It's fugazi. What Matthew McConaughey said in The Wolf of Wall Street. It's a fucking fugazi, bro. You know what I mean? But what will always stay true, what's always going to stay with you for your whole life is your core. The core of what you are, the core of your experiences, the core of who you are. That never is going to change. That's going to be with you for the whole way, for the whole ride. You know what I mean? Uh, and you can pick up anything. You might fuck around 5 years trying to be a dentist. You may be like, you know what, this ain't for me, bro. You might fuck around, boom, go join the circus. You might fuck around for that 5 years, go become a fucking scuba diver. You might fuck around another 5 years and become a fucking a monk or something. You know what I mean? Like, who knows? Who cares? Because once you've understood that it's just those things are not you, it doesn't matter. You are you. You on the inside is what makes you you. Not all of this shit. And that process of self-grievance is indefinite. That cycle of rebirth, purification, and death continuously happens. So you have to get good at it. You have to get good at letting go and recreating, destroying and rebuilding new concepts, new beliefs, new ideas, new ways that you think about yourself, new ways that you want to show up in the world. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it there.